Picture this: a towering figure in a scarlet uniform stands motionless as stone, his black bearskin hat casting shadows over eyes that have witnessed decades of royal ceremonies. For hours, he remains frozen like a statue, while tourists snap photos and children wave frantically, hoping for just a flicker of acknowledgement. These are the Queen's Guards, Britain's most stoic sentinels, trained to be invisible walls of protection around the monarchy. But what happens when the human heart beats stronger than military protocol? What occurs when compassion breaks through centuries of rigid tradition? Behind those expressionless faces and unwavering stances lie real people with real emotions, and sometimes, just sometimes, those emotions surface in the most unexpected and beautiful ways. This is not a story about perfect soldiers following orders. This is about the moments when humanity triumphs over duty, when a simple act of kindness becomes more powerful than any royal decree. These are the true stories of when the Queen's Guards broke character, revealing the extraordinary hearts beating beneath those iconic red tunics. Prepare to discover the secret world behind the palace gates, where protocol meets compassion, and where the most touching moments happen when nobody expects them. These encounters will change how you see those silent guardians forever, proving that even the most disciplined soldiers are, at their core, beautifully human. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Buckingham Palace as tourists began their daily pilgrimage to catch a glimpse of the famous Queen's Guards. Among them was 5-year-old Emma Thompson, her tiny hand firmly gripped in her mother's as they approached the towering figure in scarlet who stood like a statue at his post. Emma had been talking about this moment for weeks. Ever since her grandmother had shown her pictures of the royal guards in their magnificent uniforms, the little girl had become obsessed with meeting one. She had practiced her curtsy in the mirror, drawn pictures of soldiers with crayons, and even convinced her mother to buy her a toy sword so she could protect the palace too. Guard James Mitchell had been standing at his post for nearly 2 hours that Tuesday morning in September. At 28 years old, he was a veteran of the Coldstream Guards with 6 years of service under his belt. He had served in Afghanistan, protected dignitaries around the world, and maintained his composure through countless attempts by tourists to make him crack a smile. Nothing fazed him anymore, or so he thought. Emma broke free from her mother's grasp and marched up to the guard with the confidence only a 5-year-old could possess. She stopped directly in front of him, her head barely reaching his knees, and performed the most elaborate curtsy her little body could manage. Her pink dress puffed out around her as she wobbled slightly, trying to maintain her balance. "Hello, Mr. Guard," she said in a voice that carried clearly across the courtyard. "My name is Emma, and I came all the way from Scotland to meet you." James's eyes remained fixed straight ahead, following protocol that demanded he not acknowledge civilians while on duty. But something about the earnestness in the child's voice made his heart skip a beat. Through his peripheral vision, he could see her standing there, waiting patiently for a response that military regulations prevented him from giving. Emma's mother, Sarah, approached cautiously, preparing to retrieve her daughter and apologize for the disruption. She had warned Emma that the guards couldn't talk while working, but the determined little girl had insisted she would find a way to become friends with one of them. "I know you can't talk," Emma continued, her voice growing more confident, "but I wanted to tell you that you're very brave. My daddy says soldiers are the bravest people in the world because they keep everyone safe." She reached into her small backpack and pulled out a hand-drawn picture. "I made this for you." The drawing showed a stick figure in a red coat with a tall black hat, standing next to a much smaller figure in a pink dress. Above them, she had written "Best Friends" in crooked letters with a purple crayon. She placed the picture carefully at James's feet, making sure it wouldn't blow away in the gentle breeze. James felt a lump forming in his throat. The simple innocence of the gesture struck him in a way that years of military training hadn't prepared him for. He thought of his own daughter back home, who was about Emma's age, and how she would beam with pride when he returned from duty wearing his uniform. The little girl wasn't finished. She began telling James about her journey to London, describing every detail of her train ride, the hotel where they were staying, and how she had been saving her pocket money to buy a postcard for her teacher. Her chatter was continuous and animated, as if she truly believed the guard was listening to every word. "My granny told me that guards have to stand very still to protect the Queen," Emma explained, her hands gesturing wildly as she spoke. "That must be very hard work. Do your feet hurt?" "Mine hurt when I have to stand in line at school for too long." Other tourists had begun to gather, charmed by the one-sided conversation taking place. They watched as the little girl continued her earnest attempts to connect with the stoic figure before her. Some took pictures, others smiled warmly, but everyone seemed captivated by Emma's determination. James found himself listening intently to every word the child spoke. Her genuine concern for his well-being, her innocent questions about his job, and her unwavering belief that kindness would be reciprocated touched something deep within him. He began to question whether strict adherence to protocol was always the right choice, especially when faced with such pure human connection. As the minutes ticked by, Emma showed no signs of giving up. She told James about her pet rabbit, her favorite television show, and how she wanted to be a soldier like him when she grew up, but maybe a soldier who can talk to little girls sometimes. Her mother had given up trying to pull her away, recognizing that this moment held special significance for her daughter. The turning point came when Emma noticed a small tear in James's uniform where a button had come loose. With the matter-of-fact practicality of a child, she announced, "You have a hole in your coat, Mr. Guard. My mummy can fix that if you want. She's very good at sewing." It was then that James made a decision that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he looked down at the little girl. Their eyes met for just a moment, and he gave her the slightest nod, accompanied by what could only be described as the beginning of a smile. Emma's face lit up like a Christmas tree. "You can see me," she exclaimed, jumping up and down with excitement. "I knew you were listening. I knew we could be friends." The crowd that had gathered burst into spontaneous applause. Sarah felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she watched her daughter's dream come true in the most beautiful way possible. Even the other guards nearby seemed to stand a little straighter, proud of their colleague's moment of human connection. James quickly returned to his formal stance, but the damage was done in the best possible way. Emma had succeeded in her mission to make friends with a royal guard, and James had learned that sometimes the most important duty is simply being human. The little girl carefully picked up her drawing from the ground and handed it directly to James. This time, he looked down openly and accepted the gift with a slight bow of his head. Emma curtsied one final time, perfect in its execution, and whispered, "Thank you for keeping the Queen safe, Mr. Guard. And thank you for being my friend." As Emma and her mother walked away, the child turned back repeatedly to wave at her new friend. Each time, James allowed himself a small smile, hidden just enough to maintain some semblance of protocol while acknowledging the extraordinary little girl who had reminded him why he became a soldier in the first place. The picture Emma drew stayed with James throughout his shift that day. When he returned to the barracks that evening, he carefully placed it in his locker, where it would remain as a reminder that sometimes the most important moments in life happen when we allow our hearts to guide our actions, even when duty demands otherwise. Word of the encounter spread quickly through the regiment, but rather than facing disciplinary action, James found himself receiving quiet nods of approval from his superiors. Even the most hardened officers understood that what had transpired was not a breach of protocol, but rather a perfect example of what they were truly protecting: the innocence and joy of people like Emma. Years later, James would tell his own daughter about the little girl from Scotland who taught him that being a guard meant protecting not just places and people, but also preserving the magic and wonder that makes life beautiful. Emma's simple act of friendship had broken through centuries of tradition, proving that sometimes the strongest walls are the ones we build around our hearts, and the bravest thing we can do is let them down. The rain was falling steadily on a grey November morning when 83-year-old William Harrison shuffled slowly toward the gates of Windsor Castle, leaning heavily on his walking stick. His withered hands shook slightly, not from the cold, but from the weight of the memories he carried and the mission he had set for himself on this particular day. William wore his old military medals pinned to a worn navy blazer, each one telling a story of service, sacrifice, and brotherhood that spanned over 4 decades. The Korea War Service Medal caught what little light filtered through the clouds, while the General Service Medal with its various clasps spoke of deployments to distant lands during the height of the Cold War. But today, he wasn't thinking about his own service. Today was about keeping a promise he had made 67 years ago. Guard Marcus Chen stood at attention at the main entrance, his red tunic pristine despite the persistent drizzle. At 24, Marcus was relatively new to the Grenadier Guards, having completed his training just 8 months earlier. He had quickly earned the respect of his peers through his dedication and attention to detail, never missing a beat in the precise choreography that defined Royal Guard duty. As William approached the gate, Marcus noticed something different about this visitor. While tourists typically hurried past in groups, chattering and taking photographs, this elderly gentleman moved with purpose and carried himself with an unmistakable military bearing. Even bent with age, there was something in his posture that spoke of years spent in uniform. William stopped directly in front of Marcus and, slowly, painfully, straightened his back as much as his aged spine would allow. From his jacket pocket, he withdrew a faded photograph and held it up so the young guard could see it clearly. The black and white image showed two young soldiers in dress uniform, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning broadly at the camera. "This is my brother, Tommy," William said, his voice carrying clearly despite its quaver. "Private Thomas Harrison, Grenadier Guards, service number 238475992. He stood where you're standing now, son. Right here at this very post, protecting King George VI back in 1956. Marcus's training had taught him to remain impassive, to treat all civilians with polite indifference while maintaining his vigilant watch. But something in the old man's tone made him listen more intently, even as his eyes remained fixed on the horizon beyond William's shoulder. William continued, unaware of or unconcerned by the guard's apparent lack of response. "Tommy was 2 years younger than me, but he was always the brave one. When I got called up for national service, he volunteered to join the Guards so we could serve together. Said he wasn't going to let his big brother have all the adventures." The rain was coming down harder now, and Marcus could see that William was getting soaked, but the old man seemed oblivious to the weather. His focus was entirely on the photograph and the memories it contained. "We served together in Cyprus during the emergency," William went on. "Terrible business, that. But Tommy always said it was worth it because we were protecting something bigger than ourselves. He believed in duty, in service, in standing guard over what mattered most." Marcus found himself drawn into the story despite his training. There was something profound about this old soldier sharing his memories with a current guardian of the same traditions. Through his peripheral vision, he could see tears mixing with raindrops on William's weathered cheeks. "Tommy was killed in a car accident in 1957, just after we returned from overseas," William's voice broke slightly. "Never got to marry his girl, never got to have the children he talked about, never got to see the world change the way it has. But he died wearing this uniform, proud to be a Grenadier Guard." The old man carefully returned the photograph to his pocket and looked up at Marcus's face for the first time. "I've been coming here every November for the past 15 years, on the anniversary of his death. I tell him about how the world has changed, about our family, about the grandchildren he never got to meet. But this year I'm too old to keep making the journey." Marcus felt a profound shift in his chest, a recognition of the sacred nature of what was unfolding before him. This wasn't just an old man sharing stories with a stranger. This was a passing of the torch, a connection between generations of service that transcended time and protocol. William slowly began to raise his hand in a salute, his movements deliberate and precise despite his age. "This is for you, Tommy," he whispered. "And for all the lads who stood guard before us, and all who will stand guard after we're gone." In that moment, Marcus made a decision that would define his understanding of what it truly meant to be a Royal Guard. Slowly, with the same precision that William displayed, he returned the salute. Two soldiers, separated by more than half a century, connected by their shared commitment to something greater than themselves. The small crowd of tourists who had gathered fell completely silent, sensing they were witnessing something sacred. Several removed their hats despite the rain, while others wiped away tears that had nothing to do with the weather. Even the pigeons seemed to pause their eternal search for crumbs, as if nature itself recognized the solemnity of the moment. William held his salute for a full 30 seconds, his aged arm trembling with the effort but his resolve unwavering. When he finally lowered his hand, Marcus maintained his salute for several seconds longer, a gesture of respect that spoke volumes about the honor he felt in sharing this moment. "Thank you, son," William said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've helped an old soldier keep his promise to his brother. Tommy would be proud to know that the tradition continues, that young men like you still understand what it means to stand guard." Marcus wanted to speak, to tell this remarkable man how honored he felt to be part of this moment, but protocol and emotion combined to keep him silent. Instead, he gave the slightest nod, a barely perceptible acknowledgement that conveyed more than words ever could. William reached into his other pocket and withdrew a small object wrapped in tissue paper. "This was Tommy's," he said, carefully placing it on the ground at Marcus's feet. "His cap badge from basic training. I've carried it with me every day since 1957, but I think it's time for it to come home." The old man stood there for another moment, looking up at Marcus with eyes that had seen too much war and too much loss, but also too much love and too much beauty to ever give up hope. "Take care of this place, son," he said finally. "Take care of what it represents. And remember that every time you stand guard, you're standing for all of us who stood before you." As William turned to walk away, his steps seemed somehow lighter despite the weight of his years. He had completed his mission, fulfilled his promise, and passed on the sacred trust of guardianship to another generation. Behind him, Marcus stood a little straighter, the full weight of his responsibility settling on his shoulders like a mantle of honor. Later that evening, when Marcus's shift ended and he returned to the barracks, he carefully picked up Tommy's cap badge and held it up to the light. The metal was tarnished with age, but the crown and grenade emblem were still clearly visible, symbols of a tradition that stretched back centuries and forward into an uncertain future. Marcus placed the badge in his own locker, next to his dress uniform and personal effects. It would serve as a daily reminder that being a royal guard meant more than just following orders or maintaining discipline. It meant carrying forward the legacy of every soldier who had ever stood watch, ever sacrificed for something greater than themselves, ever believed that some things are worth protecting no matter the cost. The story of William's visit spread quietly through the regiment, passed from soldier to soldier in the way that important stories always travel in military communities. It became part of their shared history, a reminder that their duty connected them not just to the royal family they protected, but to generations of ordinary people who had done extraordinary things in service of their country. Years later, when Marcus had risen through the ranks and was training new guards himself, he would tell them about the old soldier who came to say goodbye to his brother, and about the moment when protocol gave way to something deeper and more meaningful. He would remind them that sometimes the most important thing a soldier can do is simply acknowledge the humanity in others, and that true strength lies not in rigid adherence to rules, but in knowing when compassion matters more than compliance. The bustle of Trafalgar Square echoed in the distance as 17-year-old Sophie Martinez sat on the steps leading to the National Gallery, her violin case open at her feet and her heart heavy with disappointment. She had auditioned for the London Youth Orchestra that morning, a dream she had been working toward for 3 years, only to receive the crushing news that she hadn't made the cut. Sophie had traveled from Barcelona with her music teacher, Mrs. Chen, specifically for this audition. Her family had saved for months to afford the trip, believing that their daughter's extraordinary talent with the violin would surely earn her a place in one of Europe's most prestigious youth ensembles. Now, with their flight back to Spain departing the next morning, Sophie felt like her musical dreams were crumbling around her. "Just play, Mija," Mrs. Chen had said gently before leaving Sophie alone to process her disappointment. "Sometimes when words fail us, music speaks what our hearts need to say." Sophie lifted her violin from its case, a beautiful instrument that had belonged to her grandmother, and began to tune the strings with mechanical precision. She wasn't sure what she wanted to play, but she needed to feel the familiar comfort of music flowing through her fingers, needed to remember why she had fallen in love with the violin in the first place. A few blocks away, Guard Daniel Murphy was making his way through his patrol route around the governmental district. At 31, Daniel was a seasoned member of the Scots Guards with over a decade of service. He had served in Iraq and Afghanistan, protected foreign dignitaries, and maintained his composure through countless ceremonial duties. But few people knew that before joining the military, Daniel had been a promising musician himself, studying classical guitar at the Royal Academy of Music before a family financial crisis forced him to abandon his studies and seek steady employment. As Daniel rounded the corner near Whitehall, a hauntingly beautiful melody drifted through the afternoon air. He paused, recognizing the piece immediately, Bach's Air on the G string, one of the most emotionally powerful compositions ever written. But this wasn't a recording or a performance in a concert hall. This was someone pouring their soul into the music, playing with a depth of feeling that made Daniel's chest tighten with recognition. Following the sound, Daniel found himself approaching the young woman sitting on the gallery steps. Sophie had begun playing with her eyes closed, lost in the music that flowed from her violin like liquid emotion. Her technique was flawless, but, more than that, she was telling a story through her music, expressing pain and hope and beauty in a way that transcended language. Daniel should have continued his patrol, should have maintained his professional distance from civilian activities. But something about the music held him captive, transporting him back to his own dreams of a life filled with melodies and harmonies instead of marching orders and military protocols. Sophie transitioned seamlessly from Bach to a traditional Spanish lullaby her grandmother had taught her, then to a piece by contemporary composer Olafur Arnalds that spoke of longing and loss. Each note seemed to hang in the air like a prayer, and Daniel found himself remembering why he had first picked up a guitar, why music had once been the most important thing in his world. A small crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the exceptional quality of Sophie's playing. Tourists paused their sightseeing to listen, office workers on their lunch breaks stopped to absorb the unexpected concert, and even the ever-present London pigeons seemed to settle into respectful silence. Daniel noticed tears streaming down Sophie's cheeks as she played, though her hands never wavered, never missed a note. There was something in her performance that spoke of recent disappointment, of dreams deferred and hopes challenged. He recognized that particular kind of pain, the ache that comes when the thing you love most in the world seems to slip beyond your reach. Without thinking, Daniel began to hum along softly with the melody, his voice barely audible but perfectly in tune. Music had been such an integral part of his life that even years of military service couldn't completely silence the musician within him. The harmonies came naturally, instinctively, as if his soul remembered how to sing even when his conscious mind had forgotten. Sophie heard the humming and opened her eyes, surprised to see a royal guard standing nearby, his usually stern expression softened by something approaching reverence. Their eyes met for a moment, and she saw in his face the recognition of a fellow musician, someone who understood the language she was speaking through her violin. Emboldened by this unexpected connection, Sophie began to play Danny Boy, a piece she had learned specifically because she loved its Celtic roots and emotional depth. Daniel's eyes widened in surprise and recognition. This was a song from his Irish heritage, a melody his grandmother had sung to him as a child, a piece that connected him to generations of his family who had found solace in music during difficult times. Unable to stop himself, Daniel began to sing along, his rich baritone voice joining Sophie's violin in a duet that neither of them had planned but both of them needed. His voice carried across the square, drawing even more people to witness this extraordinary moment of spontaneous collaboration between a street musician and a royal guard. The crowd was transfixed. Here was a man who was supposed to be the epitome of military discipline, singing with heartfelt emotion alongside a young woman whose music had clearly moved him beyond the bounds of protocol. It was a moment of pure human connection that transcended uniforms and nationalities and social barriers. Sophie played the melody while Daniel's voice soared above and around the notes, creating harmonies that neither of them had rehearsed but that fit together perfectly. They were telling the story of Ireland's beauty and sorrow, of leaving home and finding it again, of love that persists across distance and time. As the song reached its emotional climax, both performers were fully committed to the moment, lost in the music they were creating together. Sophie's violin seemed to sing with a human voice, while Daniel's vocals carried the weight of every Irish emigrant who had ever looked back at their homeland with longing. When the final note faded into silence, the crowd erupted in applause that seemed to echo off the surrounding buildings. People were wiping away tears, and several threw money into Sophie's violin case, recognizing that they had witnessed something truly special. Daniel realized what he had done and felt a moment of panic about breaking protocol so completely and publicly. But, when he looked at Sophie's face, radiant with joy and gratitude, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. Music had built a bridge between them, had reminded him of who he was beneath the uniform and rigid training. "Thank you," Sophie said in accented English, her voice barely above a whisper. "I needed that today. I needed to remember why I play." Daniel nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "You have a gift," he replied quietly, glancing around to make sure his superiors weren't within earshot. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Sophie began packing her violin, but, before she closed the case, she played one final piece, a simple, beautiful melody that she explained was a Spanish blessing, a way of saying goodbye while expressing gratitude for unexpected gifts. Daniel listened with his eyes closed, committing every note to memory. As Sophie prepared to leave, she approached Daniel and handed him a small card with her contact information. "If you ever come to Barcelona," she said, "please find me. I would love to play music with you again." Daniel accepted the card, knowing he would probably never use it but treasuring it nonetheless as a reminder of this extraordinary afternoon. "Keep playing," he said as she walked away. "The world needs music like yours." Later that evening, when Daniel returned to the barracks, he found his old guitar in the bottom of his footlocker, covered in dust but still perfectly tuned. For the first time in over a decade, he played again, his fingers slowly remembering the chords and melodies that had once been as natural as breathing. His fellow guards were surprised to hear music coming from Daniel's quarters, but no one complained. Instead, several of them gathered outside his door to listen, recognizing that they were witnessing their colleague reconnect with a part of himself that had been buried under years of military service. The video of Daniel and Sophie's impromptu duet, recorded by several audience members, spread across social media within hours. Rather than facing disciplinary action, Daniel found himself receiving messages of support from around the world, with people praising him for showing the human side of the Royal Guards and for proving that music truly is a universal language. Sophie, meanwhile, received a call the next morning from the London Youth Orchestra. They had seen the video and wanted to offer her a scholarship, recognizing that her ability to move people through music was exactly what they were looking for in a young musician. Her dreams were back on track, thanks in part to an unexpected duet with a Royal Guard who remembered that beneath his uniform, he was still a musician at heart. The encounter changed both of their lives in profound ways, proving that sometimes the most meaningful moments happen when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, to share our authentic selves with strangers who turn out to be kindred spirits. Music had broken down the barriers between them, creating a connection that would inspire both of them to pursue their passions with renewed vigor and purpose. The morning of July 15 dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of brilliant sunshine that London reserves for its most special occasions. At St. James's Palace, preparations were already underway for what was expected to be a routine day of ceremonial duties, but fate had other plans that would transform an ordinary wedding into an extraordinary moment of human kindness. Guard Captain Robert Sterling had been stationed at the palace gates since dawn, overseeing the security arrangements for the day's events. At 42, Robert was a respected leader in the Coldstream Guards, known for his unwavering professionalism and attention to detail. He had protected heads of state, managed crowd control during major events, and trained hundreds of younger guards in the precise choreography of royal protocol. Nothing in his experience, however, had prepared him for what would unfold on this particular Saturday. The first unusual moment came when a taxi pulled up to the palace gates just after 9 a.m., and out stepped a woman in a beautiful ivory wedding dress, her veil trailing behind her as she hurried toward the entrance. 26-year-old Rachel Morrison looked radiant despite the obvious distress in her eyes, clutching a bouquet of white roses as she approached the security checkpoint. "Please," Rachel said breathlessly to the guard at the gate, "I need help. My wedding is supposed to start in 2 hours, but our photographer never showed up. We've tried everything, called other photographers, asked family members with cameras, but everyone who's available wants more money than we have left in our budget." Rachel's story tumbled out in a rush of words mixed with barely controlled tears. She and her fiancé James had been planning their wedding for 2 years, saving every penny to afford their dream ceremony at a small church just a few blocks from the palace. They had booked a photographer 6 months in advance, but the man had disappeared overnight, apparently taking their deposit with him and leaving them scrambling for alternatives on their wedding day. "I know this sounds crazy," Rachel continued, "but James and I met right here, outside these gates, 5 years ago. We were both tourists, and we got our picture taken together in front of the palace guards. That photograph is hanging in our flat. It's the first picture we ever took together. James proposed here last Christmas, right in front of those same guards. This place is special to us." Robert listened to Rachel's story with growing sympathy, recognizing the genuine desperation in her voice. As a father of 3 daughters himself, he couldn't help but imagine how devastated he would feel if one of his children faced such a crisis on what should be the happiest day of their lives. "I don't know why I came here," Rachel admitted, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "I guess I just thought maybe, somehow, someone could help us." We don't need professional wedding photos, we just need someone to capture the moment when James and I become husband and wife. Someone to take a few pictures so we can remember this day forever." What Rachel didn't know was that Robert Sterling had a secret passion that few of his military colleagues were aware of: photography. He had been taking pictures since he was a teenager, had studied photography at university before joining the army, and still spent his free time capturing images of London's hidden beauty with his professional-grade camera equipment. His spare bedroom was converted into a darkroom where he developed film and printed photographs that adorned the walls of his home. Robert glanced at his watch, calculating quickly in his mind. His shift wouldn't end until 4 p.m., but he had 2 junior guards under his supervision who were perfectly capable of maintaining security for a few hours. The church Rachel mentioned was only a 10-minute walk from the palace, and if he moved quickly, he could potentially help this young woman while still fulfilling his duties. "Wait here for just a moment," Robert told Rachel, his mind already formulating a plan that would require him to bend several regulations but felt absolutely necessary given the circumstances. Robert approached his second-in-command, Guard Sergeant Michael Davies, and quickly explained the situation. Michael, a father of 2 young children himself, immediately understood the importance of what his captain was proposing. "Sir, you should go," Michael said without hesitation. "Jenkins and I can handle things here. It's been a quiet day, and, honestly, what you're thinking of doing, that's what being a soldier is really about. Protecting people, helping when they need it most." Robert made a decision that would go down in Palace Guard history. He arranged for his relief to cover his post early, then approached Rachel with a proposition that left her speechless. "I happen to be a photographer in my spare time," he said quietly. "And I think every bride deserves to have her wedding day remembered properly." Within 30 minutes, Robert had changed into civilian clothes, collected his professional camera equipment from his quarters, and was walking alongside Rachel toward St. Bartholomew's Church. He had called ahead to inform the wedding party of the change in plans, and, when they arrived at the church, James was waiting on the steps with a look of bewildered gratitude. "You're really going to photograph our wedding?" James asked, barely able to believe what was happening. "A royal guard is going to be our wedding photographer?" Robert smiled, adjusting his camera settings as he surveyed the charming old church with its weathered stone walls and stained glass windows. "Today I'm not a guard," he said. "Today I'm just someone who believes that every love story deserves to be captured beautifully." What followed was one of the most heartfelt and joyous wedding ceremonies Robert had ever witnessed. As Rachel and James exchanged vows, he moved quietly around the church, capturing intimate moments between the couple and their families. His military training and observation and attention to detail served him well as he anticipated the perfect shots: the moment James saw his bride walking down the aisle, the tears in Rachel's mother's eyes, the laughter during the ring exchange when the best man nearly dropped the wedding bands. Robert's photography skills were extraordinary, but, more than that, his genuine care for the couple showed in every frame he captured. He didn't just take pictures, he told the story of their love, their commitment, and the community of family and friends who had gathered to celebrate with them. During the reception at a small community hall, Robert continued photographing the celebration, capturing the first dance, the cutting of the cake, and the spontaneous speeches from family members who hadn't planned to speak but were moved by the joy of the occasion. The other wedding guests were initially puzzled by the presence of this quiet man with a professional camera, but when they learned he was a royal guard who had volunteered to help, their admiration was overwhelming. In 20 years of military service, Robert told James during a quiet moment between shots, "I protected a lot of important people and witnessed many significant events. But I've never been part of anything more important than what happened here today. Love, family, commitment, this is what we're really protecting when we stand guard." As the evening wound down, Robert presented Rachel and James with something unexpected: a beautifully bound photo album containing not just the day's wedding pictures, but also the photograph they had taken together 5 years earlier outside the palace gates, which Robert had retrieved from the palace archives. He had spent his lunch break creating a visual timeline of their love story, from their first meeting to their wedding day. "Every love story should have a proper beginning, middle, and new beginning," Robert said as he handed them the album. "This way, you'll always remember how your story started, and you'll have beautiful pictures to show your children and grandchildren." Rachel and James were speechless, overwhelmed by the kindness of this man who had transformed their potential disaster into something magical. The wedding photos Robert had taken were stunning, professional quality images that captured not just the visual beauty of the day, but the emotional depth of their commitment to each other. The story of the royal guard who became a wedding photographer spread quickly through social media, with guests sharing pictures and videos of Robert at work during the ceremony. The palace initially expressed concern about one of their guards freelancing as a photographer while off duty, but when they saw the overwhelmingly positive public response and learned the full details of Robert's act of kindness, they quietly decided to celebrate rather than censure his actions. Robert received hundreds of messages from around the world, with many people praising him for showing that military service is ultimately about serving others, regardless of whether they're royalty or ordinary citizens celebrating life's most important moments. Several professional photography organizations offered him work, recognizing his exceptional talent behind the camera. Rachel and James's wedding album became a treasured family heirloom, but, more than that, their story inspired others to look for ways to help strangers in moments of crisis. They established a small fund to help couples facing wedding day emergencies, and every year on their anniversary, they returned to the palace gates where their love story began, often bringing their children to hear about the royal guard who made their parents' wedding day perfect. Robert continued his military service for several more years, but he also began volunteering his photography skills for couples who couldn't afford professional wedding photographers. He found that capturing moments of joy and love gave him as much satisfaction as any military operation he had participated in, proving that sometimes the most important missions are the ones we choose for ourselves. The camera equipment Robert used to photograph Rachel and James's wedding is now displayed in his home study, alongside framed pictures from dozens of weddings he has photographed over the years. Each image reminds him that being a protector means more than just standing guard, it means recognizing when someone needs help and having the courage to step outside your prescribed role to provide it. Years later, when Robert's own daughters got married, their weddings were photographed by couples whose own wedding days he had rescued. The circle of kindness he had initiated with Rachel and James continued to grow, proving that single acts of compassion can create ripples that spread far beyond their original impact, touching lives in ways we may never fully understand. The autumn leaves swirled around the grounds of Buckingham Palace as Guard Major Thomas Whitfield prepared for what he knew would be his final shift after 35 years of distinguished service. At 58, Thomas was the longest-serving active member of the Welsh Guards, a living repository of institutional knowledge and tradition who had witnessed decades of change while remaining constant as the palace's most reliable protector. Thomas had dedicated his entire adult life to the crown, serving through 3 different monarchs and countless state occasions. He had been present during royal weddings, state funerals, and historic ceremonies that had shaped the modern monarchy. His colleagues respected him not just for his longevity, but for his unwavering commitment to excellence and his mentorship of younger guards who looked to him as the embodiment of everything a royal protector should be. On this crisp October morning, Thomas was scheduled to stand his final watch at the front gates, a symbolic conclusion to a career that had defined not just his professional life, but his entire identity. Tomorrow, he would retire to a small cottage in Wales, where his wife Margaret was waiting to begin the next chapter of their lives together, away from the demands and pressures of royal service. At 9:30 a.m., just as Thomas was settling into his position for the morning shift, a black sedan pulled up to the palace gates with unusual urgency. From the passenger seat emerged Dr. Sarah Hendricks, a pediatric oncologist from Great Ormond Street Hospital, her face etched with exhaustion and barely contained emotion. Dr. Hendricks approached the security checkpoint carrying a tablet computer and wearing the expression of someone carrying devastating news. She spoke quickly to the guard at the gate, her voice tight with professional control masking deep personal distress. "I need to speak to someone in authority," Dr. Hendricks said. "I have a patient, a 7-year-old girl named Lucy Patterson, who is dying of leukemia. She has perhaps 48 hours left, and she has one final wish that her family desperately wants to fulfill." Thomas, observing the conversation from his position, noticed the doctor's obvious distress and the urgency of her manner. Something about the situation triggered his protective instincts, the same intuition that had kept him alert and effective throughout his long career. Dr. Hendricks continued her explanation to the gate guard, who was clearly uncertain about how to handle such an unusual request. "Lucy has been fascinated by the royal guards since she was diagnosed 2 years ago. Her hospital room is decorated with pictures of the palace guards, and she's watched every video of the changing of the guards ceremony hundreds of times. She says the guards are the bravest people in the world because they protect everyone, and she wants to be brave like them. The doctor's voice began to crack as she described Lucy's final wish. She wants to meet a real royal guard, to tell them thank you for being brave, and to give them a picture she drew of herself as a guard protecting the palace. Her parents have tried everything, written letters, made phone calls, contacted every official channel they could find. But, with her condition deteriorating so rapidly, there isn't time for proper procedures. Thomas felt something shift inside his chest, a recognition that this moment was bigger than protocol or procedures. In 35 years of service, he had protected the royal family from countless threats and maintained security through innumerable challenges. But here was a different kind of threat, the threat of a dying child's final wish going unfulfilled, the threat of a family facing the worst possible loss without the small comfort of making their daughter happy one last time. Making a decision that would cap his career in the most appropriate way possible, Thomas approached the gate where Dr. Hendricks was still pleading her case. "Doctor," he said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of decades of service, "I'm Major Whitfield. Tell me about Lucy." Dr. Hendricks looked up at Thomas with surprise and hope, recognizing something in his bearing that suggested he might be someone who could actually help. She pulled out her tablet and showed him pictures of Lucy, a beautiful little girl with large brown eyes and a bright smile, despite the obvious effects of her illness and treatment. "She's the bravest person I've ever met," Dr. Hendricks said, scrolling through pictures of Lucy in her hospital bed, always smiling despite the medical equipment surrounding her. "She never complains about the treatments, never asks why me. Instead, she spends her time drawing pictures of guards and talking about how someday she wants to protect other children the way the guards protect the royal family." Thomas studied the images of Lucy, seeing in her eyes the same determination and courage that he had tried to embody throughout his own career. In that moment, he understood that his final act as a royal guard would be his most important one. "Where is Lucy now?" Thomas asked, already formulating a plan that would require him to make choices that went far beyond his official duties. "She's at Great Ormond Street Hospital," Dr. Hendricks replied. "She's too weak to travel, too sick to leave her room. But she keeps asking if any guards will come to see her before." The doctor's voice trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Thomas looked at the other guards on duty, his colleagues who had served alongside him for years, and understood the weight of the decision he was contemplating. Without needing to discuss it, they all nodded their approval, recognizing that some moments transcend regulations and require humans to act from their hearts rather than their training manuals. "I'll need to arrange coverage for my post," Thomas said to Dr. Hendricks, "but if you're willing to wait 30 minutes, I'd like to visit Lucy myself." What followed was a flurry of activity as Thomas organized his relief, changed into a fresh dress uniform, and prepared to make what would likely be his final official act as a royal guard. He gathered several ceremonial items from his quarters, a spare cap badge, a set of buttons from his dress uniform, and a formal photograph of himself in full ceremonial dress that he signed with a personal message for Lucy. The journey to Great Ormond Street Hospital took 20 minutes, during which Dr. Hendricks briefed Thomas on Lucy's condition and prepared him for what he might encounter. The hospital, she explained, had become Lucy's entire world over the past 6 months, and the staff had become her extended family. When Thomas walked into Lucy's hospital room in his full dress uniform, the little girl's face literally lit up with wonder. Despite the tubes and monitors surrounding her bed, despite the obvious frailty of her small body, Lucy's eyes sparkled with joy at seeing a royal guard standing in her room. "You came," Lucy whispered, her voice weak but filled with amazement. "You really came to see me." Thomas approached her bed slowly, removing his cap in a gesture of respect that he had never made for anyone other than royalty. "I heard you wanted to meet a guard," he said gently. "I'm Major Whitfield, and I've been protecting the palace for 35 years. Lucy's eyes grew wide with awe. 35 years? You must be the bravest person in the whole world." Thomas smiled, feeling tears threatening to break through his professional composure. "Actually, Lucy, I think you might be braver than any of us. Dr. Hendricks tells me you've been fighting like a warrior." For the next hour, Thomas sat beside Lucy's bed while she shared her dreams of becoming a guard, showed him the drawing she had made of herself in a red uniform, and asked detailed questions about what it was like to protect the palace. Her curiosity was insatiable, her admiration genuine, and her courage in the face of her illness absolutely heartbreaking. "I made this for you," Lucy said, carefully reaching for a folded piece of paper on her bedside table. The drawing showed a stick figure girl in a red coat and tall black hat, standing next to a much taller figure that was clearly meant to be a royal guard. Across the top, in crayon letters, she had written, "Thank you for being brave for everyone." Thomas accepted the drawing with hands that trembled slightly, recognizing that he was receiving something far more valuable than any military decoration he had ever earned. "This is beautiful, Lucy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is the most special gift anyone has ever given me." Lucy beamed with pride, then became serious for a moment. "Major Whitfield, will you promise me something?" "Of course, Lucy. What would you like me to promise?" "Promise me that you'll keep protecting people even after I can't be brave anymore. Promise me that someone will always be watching over everyone, keeping them safe." Thomas felt his heart break and heal simultaneously, understanding that this 7-year-old girl had just articulated the deepest meaning of his life's work better than any mission briefing ever had. "I promise, Lucy," he said solemnly. "And, even when I retire, there will always be other brave guards ready to protect everyone, just like you would have done." Lucy smiled with satisfaction, then surprised everyone in the room by attempting to salute Thomas from her hospital bed. Her small hand moved slowly but precisely to her forehead in a gesture that was both heartbreaking and inspiring. Thomas immediately returned her salute, treating her with the same respect he would show to any fellow soldier. "You're officially an honorary guard now, Lucy," Thomas said, pinning one of his spare cap badges to her hospital gown. "This makes you part of our family forever." The visit lasted another hour, during which Lucy's parents arrived and were overwhelmed with gratitude for Thomas's kindness. He posed for pictures with Lucy, listened to her stories about other children on the ward who she was trying to help be brave, and promised to ensure that she would always be remembered as one of the most courageous guards who ever served. When it came time to leave, Thomas knew he was saying goodbye to someone who had changed his understanding of what true bravery looked like. Lucy had faced her illness with more grace and courage than many soldiers he had known faced much lesser challenges. Lucy passed away peacefully 2 days later, surrounded by her family and holding the cap badge Thomas had given her. Her funeral was attended by dozens of children and families from the hospital, along with several of Thomas's fellow guards who had heard about her story and wanted to pay their respects to their honorary colleague. Thomas's retirement ceremony the following week was dedicated to Lucy's memory, with her parents in attendance and her drawing displayed prominently alongside Thomas's military decorations. In his retirement speech, Thomas spoke about learning true courage from a 7-year-old girl who had taught him that the greatest battles are often fought by the smallest warriors. The cap badge Lucy had been buried with was replaced by Thomas with an identical one, which he keeps on his desk in his cottage in Wales as a daily reminder that protecting others isn't just about standing guard at palace gates, it's about recognizing when someone needs protection from fear, loneliness, or despair, and being willing to provide that protection regardless of protocol or convenience. Lucy's drawing hangs framed in Thomas's study, next to his military commendations and photographs from 35 years of royal service. Visitors often comment on the childish artwork among all the formal military memorabilia, and Thomas always tells them it's his most important decoration because it came from someone who understood better than anyone what it truly means to be a guardian.